My name is Octavian Cavendish, and if you think life becomes predictable at 68, you're as wrong as I am. My home in Maywood, a columned Victorian mansion, has been mentioned twice in historical society booklets, and I've lived in it for the past 37 years. First with Harriet, my wife, then alone after she died of cancer. For the last 15 years, I have dwelt here in blessed solitude, save for monthly visits from my son Wesley and his wife Raven, who came to make sure I was not yet dead, which meant my inheritance was still out of reach. I don't idealize my fatherhood. After Harriet died when Wesley was 27, things fell apart between us. Perhaps I was too immersed in grief and work. Perhaps he expected more involvement in his affairs. Whatever the case, Wesley grew up with the conviction that the world owed him. The problem was, he decided, I was part of that world. My mornings always started the same way. A cup of strong black tea, buttered toast, a newspaper. I sat in the bay window of the living room, overlooking the park across the street. The town was waking up leisurely, as it should in Maywood. An ordinary Tuesday in September, unremarkable except for one thing, the doorbell ringing at 9:30 in the morning. Wesley stood on the doorstep, without Raven, no prior call, with a strained smile and an overly bright gleam in his eyes. "Dad!" he exclaimed, as if we'd seen each other yesterday, not 2 months ago. I was driving by and thought I'd stop by. I looked at my watch. Wesley never drove by at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning when his office was 40 minutes away in the opposite direction. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He walked into the living room, glanced around the room, and whistled. "You know, Father, this house is starting to look a little outdated. Have you thought about renovating, or maybe moving to something more compact?" I placed a cup of tea in front of him, which he ignored. "The house is perfectly fine," I replied, "and I'm quite comfortable here. But look at these walls, the plaster is cracking, and those old windows, how much heat is escaping through them? And the basement, you said it had moisture problems." I never told him about the basement problems. They didn't exist. "The house is perfectly fine," I repeated. "Why are you here, Wesley?" He smiled strainedly. "Can't I just visit my father?" "You can, but you don't. Not at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning." Wesley started pacing around the living room, looking at things, touching the spines of books as if he were seeing them for the first time. "Actually," he said finally, "I'm worried about you. After that stroke—" "It was a micro-stroke," I corrected him, "2 years ago, and I don't need your concern." "Dash. You've become more vulnerable," he continued as if I hadn't said anything. "Raven and I think you should look into nursing home options, or maybe move closer to us. There are some wonderful condos near our neighborhood." I sipped my tea, peering at my son over the top of my cup. Wesley had always been a bad liar. The right corner of his mouth twitched when he tried to sell a lie. Now it was twitching like he'd been electrocuted. "I'm fine here," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." "But Father, this house, it's too big for one man. It must cost a fortune to maintain. And if you fall, who's going to help you? I have Evelyn next door, and Mrs. Prescott comes twice a week to clean. I'm not alone, and I'm not helpless." Wesley sighed heavily, like I was a naughty child. "I just want you to think about the future," he said. "By the way, where do you keep the deeds to the house? Just in case, just in case." "That's it. The deeds." I put the cup on the table. "In a safe deposit box, just like they had been for the last 20 years. I lied. "They were in my office, in the safe behind the painting." "Why do you ask? It's good to have a spare set. Just in case." I looked at my son, 42 years old, and he still thinks he can fool me. "I've got to go to work," I said, getting up. "You can finish your tea, and then please close the door on your way out." Wesley looked surprised. "You're still working? At your age?" 3 days a week, I counsel young accountants at Hampton and Associates. Not everyone chooses to rot alive in their homes. He blushed and mumbled something about not meaning it. I walked him to the door. He turned around on the threshold. "I'm really worried about you, Father." "Of course you are," I said, and we both knew I didn't believe a word he said. I watched his brand new Lexus pull out of the driveway. Raven had insisted on buying that car. even though I knew for a fact that Wesley was in debt after a bad investment last year. At least that's how he'd explained it to me when he'd asked to borrow 5 grand. Money I was sure I'd never see again. I arrived at Hampton and Associates 20 minutes late, but no one made a remark. One of the benefits of old age is that people lower the bar of expectations. Gilbert Holt was waiting for me in my office, looking through some papers. We'd known each other since high school, and for the last 10 years he'd been the town clerk, handling all of Maywood's paperwork. "You're late," he said, not looking up from the papers. "I had a surprise visit," I replied, taking off my coat. "Wesley." Gilbert looked up, his gray eyebrows rising. "Wesley? Tuesday morning? That's odd, more than strange. Asked about the condition of the house, the deeds, hinted that I should move." Gilbert frowned and set the papers aside. "Octavian, you're not going to believe this, but yesterday a woman came to my office inquiring about an appraisal of your house and the lot around it." I froze. "What woman?" "She introduced herself as Bella Thorne from Prime Real Estate." "I don't know of any such agency in Maywood." "What did you tell her?" "That I couldn't give out information without the owner's permission." Then she showed me the power of attorney. I got a chill inside. "What power of attorney?" Gilbert took a piece of paper out of the folder and handed it to me. I unfolded it and saw my signature, or almost mine. Someone had tried very hard to copy my signature, but I noticed the difference immediately. In Cavendish's K, the top line was always a little longer on mine. Here it was shorter. "It's a forgery," I said. "I know," Gilbert nodded. "That's why I came to you. The signature is similar, but not identical. And the date? 2 weeks ago? Weren't you in Portland at that time for a conference?" I nodded, still looking at the fake power of attorney. "Wesley. It had to be him. But why? Did she ask anything else? This Bella Thorne? She was interested in our city's real estate procedures and the zoning plans for your property." I looked at Gilbert. "You think they want to sell my house? Or the land? Your lot is one of the largest in the downtown area, and all this talk about a new shopping center." I knew about the project. The city council had been talking about building a mall for years, but they couldn't find a good location. My lot with my house was right in the area that was being considered as one of the possible locations. "I don't think Wesley is that forward-thinking," I said. "He'd never been able to plan beyond the next week. But Raven, this could have been her idea." "What are you going to do?" I folded the fake power of attorney and slipped it into my pocket. "For starters, find out exactly what they're up to. Can you check to see if there have been any other inquiries about my estate?" Gilbert nodded. "I've already checked. 2 weeks ago, there was a request for an appraisal of the market value of the house through an online form, and a request for an extract from the owner's register. Both requests on behalf of Octavian Cavendish. But not from me. Of course not." We looked at each other. Gilbert was the only person, apart from the late Harriet, who knew me well enough to realize that I was not the sort of person to let things slide. "I'll keep you posted if there are any new requests," he said, heading for the door. "And Octavian, be careful. If they've gone to the trouble of forging documents, who knows what else they're capable of." After he left, I sat at my desk, looking out the window at Maywood Street. People went about their business, unaware of the treachery that was ripening in my own home. Wesley had always been weak. Even as a child, he had allowed himself to be manipulated by the stronger boys. Then it turned into a habit of taking the path of least resistance. Raven had simply taken the place of those boys. She'd been running it for 15 years now, and I suspected it was her dissatisfaction with their financial situation that had pushed Wesley into this scam. I wasn't going to call them and confront them. First of all, they'd deny it. Second, it would scare them off, and I wouldn't know the full extent of their plans. No, I decided to proceed differently. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number. "Evelyn? It's Octavian. Remember you said your niece works in real estate? I need her help." I came home that evening, and first thing I did was check the safe behind the painting in the study. The papers were there, but I couldn't be sure Wesley hadn't made copies. I ran my hand over the antique oak paneling, feeling every irregularity in the wood. This house had seen the birth of my son, the death of my wife, and now the betrayal of my family. The next day, Evelyn stopped by my house with news from her niece, Tiffany. We were sitting on the veranda watching the falling leaves in the garden. Tiffany says there's no prime agency in our county, Evelyn said, sipping her tea. But she found something interesting in the system. Your house showed up on the preliminary list for a real estate auction. Auction? I almost choked. What auction? The annual county real estate auction. It's in 2 weeks at the convention center. They usually sell foreclosed homes, commercial properties. Tiffany says your house is listed as a private trustee sale. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold rage growing inside. Auction. They decided to sell my house under the hammer like some confiscated wreck, and they didn't even bother to tell me. There's something else, Evelyn added, leaning closer. Tiffany says the starting bid is very low, way below market. Of course it is. They wanted a quick sale. Get the money and disappear. Thank you, Evelyn, I said, gripping the armrests of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white. You've been very helpful. What are you going to do, Octavian? She asked, and there was concern in her voice. Should I go to the police? I shook my head. Not yet. I had a better plan. When Evelyn left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking out at my garden, at the house I'd lived in most of my life. Wesley and Raven wanted to take that away from me, sell my life off. Well, they were in for a surprise. I wasn't the helpless old man they thought I was. I was Octavian Cavendish, a man who had been an auditor for 35 years and knew more about financial fraud than they could imagine. I rose from my chair and entered the house. In my office, in a desk drawer, was an old phone book. I found a number I hadn't dialed in years and picked up the phone. Bart, this is Octavian Cavendish. I need your help. It's about teaching my son and his wife a lesson. My suspicions have turned into certainties. Wesley and Raven decided to sell my house without my knowledge or consent, but they didn't yet know who they were dealing with. Bart Ellington met me in his office the next day. His private detective agency was located above a dry cleaner's shop on the west side of Maywood. Not the most prestigious of places, but Bart had never been one for flashy appearances. He was interested in the result, not the wrapper. We'd worked together a few times when I was chief auditor at Hampton and Associates, and we needed to check out suspicious clients. It's been a long time, Octavian, Bart said, pointing to the worn leather chair across from his desk. 5 years at least. 7, I corrected him. Since we uncovered the fraud at Blue Creek Development. Bart grinned, stroking his graying mustache. That's right. That was a good one. So what do you got now? I told him everything. About Wesley's strange visit, about the fake power of attorney, about the auction. Bart listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in his notebook. It's a family matter, he said when I was done. Sure enough, are you sure you don't want to handle it in a more traditional way? Talk to your son, maybe? It's too late for talking, I replied. They crossed the line by forging my signature. I want to know everything. How long they've been planning this, who else is involved, and most importantly, where the money from the sale should go. Bart nodded. I understand, but be warned, this could become a criminal case. Your son risks jail time for fraud. I looked out the window at the gray Maywood sky. I know, and let that be on his conscience. We went over the details. Bart will look into Wesley and Raven's finances, track their calls and movements over the last month, find out who they've been in contact with about selling the house. I'll get back to you in a couple days, he said, walking me to the door. And Octavian, be careful. If they're doing this, they're desperate for money. Desperate people can do a lot of things. I nodded and went outside. The autumn wind threw a handful of fallen leaves in my face. I pulled up the collar of my coat and headed for my car. The thought that my own son, my own flesh and blood, could do this to me was not so much painful as it was deafening rage. I hadn't felt such strong emotions in a long time. Perhaps Wesley had done me a favor. He reminded me that I was still alive. When I got home, I found a message from Raven on my answering machine. Hey, Octavian, it's Raven. Just wanted to see how you were doing. Wesley said he stopped by to see you. We're so worried. Why don't we stop by this weekend? Bring over dinner. Call me when you have time. Her voice sounded sweet, with that fake concern I'd learned to recognize over the years. I didn't bother to call back. Instead, I went up to my office and pulled out a folder of medical records. 2 years ago, I'd had a microstroke during a business trip to Boston. It was nothing serious. A slight numbness in my left arm, mild dizziness. The doctors insisted on a 2-week hospital stay, followed by rehabilitation. Wesley and Raven flew to Boston while I was in the hospital. They stayed 3 days and flew out after making sure there was no life-threatening danger. It was then I suspected that they decided I was vulnerable, that I was no longer in control. I looked at the hospital discharge papers, November 10th, 2 years ago, and then I looked at the date of the forged power of attorney, November 15th of the same year. They didn't waste any time. They took advantage of the moment when I was weak to forge a document giving them the right to dispose of my property. But why did they decide to act only now, 2 years later? What had changed? The answer came the next day when Bart called me at work. "Your son is in serious trouble," he said without preamble. "He owed a large sum of money to one Vincent Cord. You know him?" I shook my head even though Bart couldn't see it. "No. Who's he?" "A bookie. Not a small-time bookie. Wesley lost on horse racing and baseball. It's an impressive sum, about 300 grand. I felt a little out of breath. 300,000? Where would Wesley get that kind of money to bet? Exactly, he didn't. He borrowed from Cord, lost, borrowed more to win it back, and lost again. It's a classic pattern, and he's due in a month. Now it all makes sense. That's why they decided to sell the house, I said. They needed the money fast. Exactly. And from what I'd heard about Cord, he wasn't the kind of guy who'd give any reprieve. I squeezed the phone receiver. Is there anything else? Yeah. Your sister-in-law met with a representative from Everett Construction. That's the same firm that's planning to build the mall. So Gilbert was right. They wanted to sell not only the house, but also the land for the development. Thanks, Bart. Keep digging. I need to know all the details of the auction. After talking to Bart, I sat in my office looking at Harriet's picture on my desk. She would be as disappointed in Wesley as I was. She'd probably be crying, trying to make excuses for him. Harriet had always been softer than me, but I knew even she couldn't forgive such a betrayal. At the end of the day, Gilbert came to see me. There's news, he said, closing the door behind him. The auction has officially listed your house in the catalog. They sent it to me for approval as a representative of the city government. He handed me a glossy booklet. I flipped through it and found my house on page 27. Victorian mansion with history, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 0.5 of an acre lot in an upscale neighborhood. Starting bid is $450,000. $450? I couldn't believe my eyes. That's less than half the market value, Gilbert nodded. They're obviously in a hurry to sell. And there's one more thing. The note says that the buyer gets not only the house, but also the right to change the category of the land. This has already been coordinated with the city planning. But that's not true, I said. The city council has yet to make a zoning decision on my lot. That's correct. But in the documents that this woman, Bella Thorne, provided, there is a preliminary approval. It looks real, with stamps and signatures. I cursed. Wesley and Raven went further than I thought they would. They didn't just forge a power of attorney. They fabricated a whole package of documents. Who signed that authorization? Gilbert grimaced. That's the problem. It's signed by Frank Dawson, head of the planning committee. But Frank claims he didn't sign anything. It's another forgery. I stood up and went to the window. The rain drummed on the glass, blurring the outline of the street. They'll stop at nothing, I said quietly. Octavian, Gilbert came over to me. This isn't just a family quarrel anymore. It's a criminal offense. We have to go to the police. I shook my head. Not now. First, I want to know who else is involved. I don't believe Wesley and Raven pulled this whole scam on their own. Someone's helping them. But the auction's in 10 days. If we don't stop it now, we'll stop it, I interrupted, but in our own way. I want them to come to the auction. I want to see their faces when their plan falls apart. Gilbert looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but be careful, and keep me in the loop. When he left, I looked through the auction catalog again. The pictures showed my house in the most favorable light. The grand facade, the manicured garden, the antique furniture in the living room. Everything looked perfect, a dream home at a bargain price, and all without my knowledge or consent. On my way home, I stopped by Evelyn's house. She met me on the doorstep of her small cottage, wrapped in a shawl. "Octavian, come in quickly, you'll get wet." We settled down in her cozy kitchen. Evelyn put a cup of hot cocoa in front of me. "I found something interesting," she said, sitting down across from me. "Remember when you asked me to watch your house when you were away?" I nodded. After the conversation with Bart, I'd asked Evelyn to pay attention to any visitors who might show up at my house. "Yesterday, while you were at work, Wesley and Raven came over. There was another man with them. Tall, expensive suit. They were walking around the house talking about something. Then the man pulled out a tape measure and started measuring the lot." "Did they go inside?" "No, they just looked outside. But the man seemed very interested. They stayed for about an hour. It got me thinking. It was probably a representative of Everett Construction or a potential buyer they brought in ahead of time." "Thank you, Evelyn. You've been very helpful." "Octavian," she leaned across the table to me. "What's going on? Why is Wesley showing the house to outsiders?" I sighed. Evelyn had been my neighbor for almost 20 years. She deserved the truth. "They're trying to sell my house without my knowledge. Forge the deeds. Put it on the auction block." Evelyn turned pale. "Oh my God! But how? Why?" "Wesley's in debt. Gambling. They need money fast. We need to call the police." I shook my head. "Not now. I have a plan." I told her my idea. Evelyn listened with her eyes wide open. "It's risky," she said when I was done. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." When I got home, I found another message from Raven on my answering machine. "Octavian, it's me again. Wesley and I are worried that you're not returning our calls. Is everything okay? Maybe we should stop by your place tomorrow. Call me, please." I erased the message. Their sudden concern was so fake it was nauseating. They weren't worried about me. They were worried that their plan might go awry. The next day, Bart came to my house with new information. "Your sister-in-law met with a lawyer who specializes in real estate transactions," he said, unfolding a file on the table. "One Hugh Price. He's known for taking on dubious cases if the price is right." "He probably prepared the forged documents," I suggested. "Probably. And there's something else. I checked Wesley's finances. He'd withdrawn almost $20,000 in cash from his account in the last month. Small amounts, so as not to attract attention." "Bribes?" "Looks like it. Probably to someone in city government who helped with a bogus zoning approval." I rubbed my temples. The scale of the scam was getting bigger. Wesley and Raven didn't just use forgery, they created a whole network of deception. "What about the auction?" I asked. "Any details?" Bart nodded. "It will be held in 8 days at the Maywood Plaza Convention Center. It starts at 10 in the morning. Your house is listed as number 17, and it will be sold around noon." "Who's bidding?" "Dash Clark and Sons Auction House. They're not aware of the forgery, just doing their job." I was thinking. A plan was starting to form in my head. "I need you to find out who else is interested in my house. If there are any pre-bids on the auction." "I already did." Bart handed me a sheet of paper. 3 companies and 2 individuals. One of the companies is Everett Construction. They're obviously targeting your land." I went through the list. In addition to Everett, there were 2 other construction firms and 2 wealthy real estate collectors from a neighboring state. "Good," I said. "Now I need you to do one more thing." I laid out my plan. Bart listened, sometimes frowning, sometimes nodding. "It'll work," he said when I was done. "But you'll have to shell out a considerable amount of money." "That's not a problem. I've got enough savings." "One more thing. If we do this, your son won't just lose money, he could end up in jail." I looked at the picture of Wesley on the mantelpiece. He was smiling, a college graduate in a robe and square cap. I had once been proud of him. I had once thought he would grow up to be a decent man. "So be it," I said firmly. He had made his choice. 3 days before the auction, Wesley and Raven showed up unexpectedly at my house. I had just gotten home from work and was about to eat dinner when I heard the doorbell ring. "Dad!" Wesley exclaimed with the same fake joy as the last time. "We thought we'd come by and check on you. You weren't answering your cell phone." Raven stood beside him, dressed as always, too flashy for a visit to an elderly relative. Octavian, she leaned over to kiss my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume. How are you feeling? We were so worried. I invited them in, feigning naive joy at their visit. To what do I owe this attention? I asked as I led them into the living room. We just missed you, Wesley said, sitting down on the couch. It's been a long time. 2 weeks, I said. It hadn't been that long. Raven took a quick look around the room as if sizing up the goods. The house looks beautiful, Octavian. Have you updated it? No, same as always. What about you? Wesley asked, leaning forward. No health problems? Any dizziness? Weakness? I barely held back a chuckle. They were hoping I was weak, that I wouldn't notice their machinations. I'm perfectly fine, I answered. The doctor says I'm in great shape for my age. Wesley and Raven exchanged quick glances. That's great, Raven said with a strained smile. You know, we've been thinking, maybe you should take a vacation. Take a vacation somewhere, like this Sunday. We could arrange for you to go to the Pine Forest Spa Hotel. They have great massages, mineral water pool. This Sunday, auction day, they wanted me out of town. Thank you for your concern, I said, but I have other plans for Sunday. What plans? Wesley asked quickly. Nothing much. The local historical society is giving a tour of Maywood's old houses. I promised to help. It was a lie, but they bought it. Why don't you reschedule? Raven suggested it. The spa hotel is really amazing, and it's a gift from us. I'm afraid not, I shook my head. I gave my word. But thank you for the offer. They stayed for another hour or so, asking me about my health, my home, my future plans. I answered evasively, watching them get more and more nervous. Finally, they left, promising to come back the following week. When the door closed behind them, I called Bart. They were just at my place, I said. They tried to lure me out of town the day of the auction. Not surprising, Bart replied. The good news is that I've organized everything. We're ready to go. Great. How about a lawyer? Beverly Holder has agreed. She'll be on site with the paperwork. Beverly was one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. She was also a longtime client of mine when I worked at Hampton and Associates. Okay, I said. So it'll be resolved on Sunday then. I hung up the phone and went to the window. It was starting to rain outside, the drops drumming on the glass. I watched Wesley and Raven get into their Lexus. They were arguing about something. Raven was gesticulating irritably. Wesley looked depressed. I knew what they were talking about. Their plan could backfire if I showed up at the auction. But they didn't know the main thing. I wasn't just going to show up there. I was planning to put on a real show. The remaining days before the auction were spent preparing. I met with Beverly, signed the necessary paperwork, transferred the money to the account from which payments would be made. Bart kept an eye on Wesley and Raven, reporting their every move. They were meeting with a representative of Everett Construction, with Hugh Price's lawyer, with some official from the city government, preparing for their triumph. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my office looking at the deeds to my house. A house that wasn't just a building, it was part of my life, my history. A house that my son and his wife had tried to steal from me. I felt no regret for what I was about to do, just cold determination. Wesley had a lesson to learn, perhaps the most important lesson of his life. Never underestimate your father. The morning of the auction day was cold and clear. I woke up at 5 in the morning, even though my alarm was set for 6. I couldn't sleep, too many thoughts running through my head. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how one decision, one betrayal, could destroy a family. It hadn't been a real family for a long time, though. After Harriet's death, Wesley and I had existed more like distant relatives, bound only by formal visits on holidays, and Raven's appearance in his life had only widened that gap. At 6:30, the phone rang. It was Bart. "Good morning, Octavian," he said. "Are you ready?" "Yes," I answered, looking at the suit neatly laid out on the chair. My best suit, the dark blue one I only wore for special occasions. "Everything going according to plan?" "Everything's fine. I just saw Wesley and Raven stop by a coffee shop across from the convention center. They look nervous, but ready. Raven's in a new dress, looks like they're planning to celebrate." "Good." Cell phone rings. "We'll meet as arranged?" Yeah, I'll meet you at the back door at 9:30. Beverly's already there, filing the paperwork. I hung up the phone and started to get dressed. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. At 8 o'clock, Evelyn called. Octavian? I just wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind. I haven't changed my mind, I replied, tightening my tie in front of the mirror. It's just the way it's going. Take care of yourself, she said quietly, and let me know how it ends. I promised to call her right after the auction and said goodbye. Then I checked the contents of my briefcase, the original deeds to the house, the medical report from my doctor confirming my legal capacity, the power of attorney in Beverly's name, the cash for the auction. Everything was in place. At 9:20, I left the house and got into a cab called in advance. Normally, I preferred to drive myself, but today I didn't want to take any chances. My nerves could fail me at the worst possible moment. Maywood Plaza Conference Center, I said to the driver. Please pull up in the back toward the service entrance. Bart was waiting for me as promised. He looked unaccustomedly formal in his suit and without his mustache, which he'd shaved off to disguise himself. Everything's ready, he said as he ushered me through the service entrance. Beverly has registered as your representative. She has the number 42 plaque. Wesley and Raven are already inside, sitting in the front row. We walked down an empty hallway and stopped in front of a door labeled Office Space. From here you can watch the room without being seen. Bart opened the door, which revealed a small room with a one-way mirror facing the auction room. When your house goes on the auction block, I'll give you a sign. Beverly is sitting in the third row, wearing a red jacket. I nodded and looked into the hall through the glass. The room was already half full. Men in expensive suits, women with impeccable hairdos, bargain hunters. And among them in the front row, Wesley and Raven. My son was pale but trying to look confident. Raven, on the other hand, was radiant, dressed in a dark red dress, too flashy for a business event. They talked quietly about something, Raven laughing occasionally, covering her mouth with a hand with a flawless manicure. The auction starts in 10 minutes, Bart said, glancing at his watch. Your house is 17th on the list. In about an hour, it'll be his turn. I nodded and sat down in a chair against the wall. Bart remained standing by the mirror, watching the room. The Everett construction representative is here too, he said after a moment. A tall man in a gray suit, third row, far right. And another potential buyer, I don't know. An older woman in a tweed suit, with a young assistant. Sounds like a real estate collector. I didn't answer, immersed in my own thoughts. How does a son feel about selling his father's house? What is Wesley telling himself to justify this act? That he's just trying to survive? That I'll be dead soon anyway and he'll get the house? Or is he not thinking about it at all, completely absorbed in his own problems? At exactly 10 o'clock, the auction began. I could hear the auctioneer's voice over the speaker in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Maywood County Real Estate Auction. Today we present to you 30 unique properties ranging from historic buildings to modern apartments. Please keep a close eye on the lots and remember to pick up your bidding signs. The first lots went quickly. Small houses on the outskirts of the city, commercial premises in the center. I listened, half listening, waiting for my turn. Bart made occasional comments, but mostly we were silent. When we reached the 15th lot, he said, "It's almost our turn. Are you sure you want to do it this way? We could just show the papers and cancel the auction." "No," I answered firmly. "I want them to feel what I felt when I found out about their betrayal. I want to see their faces." Bart nodded and went back to watching. After another 15 minutes, the auctioneer announced, "Lot number 17, Victorian mansion in the historic Maywood neighborhood. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, lot 0.5 of an acre. The starting bid is $450,000. Please note that the buyer gets not only the house, but also the right to reclassify the land, making it attractive for commercial use." Pictures of my house appeared on the big screen behind the auctioneer. I felt my heart clench at the sight of the living room where Harriet and I spent so many evenings, the study where I worked on projects, the garden she loved so much. "Okay, let's start the bidding at $450,000. Who will bid $450,000? The Everett construction representative held up a sign. $450,000. There's an offer of $450,000. Who will bid 500? An older woman in a tweed suit raised her sign. 500,000. We have an offer of 500,000. Who will give 550? Everett held up the sign again. 550,000. Who will bid 600? The bidding continued, the price rising rapidly. 600,000, 650, 700. I could see Wesley and Raven watching intently. Raven flinched slightly at each raise, and then smiled. You bet. Each raise meant more money for them. When the price reached 800,000, there were only two bidders left, Everett Construction and the elderly woman. They exchanged glances across the room like duelists before a decisive shot. 850,000, announced the auctioneer after another Everett bid. 850 times. 852. 850. The woman shook her head. She was getting out of the game. Sold for $850,000 to a representative of Everett Construction? Wesley jumped up from his seat and turned to the audience with a triumphant smile. Say goodbye to your house, he exclaimed, turning to the losing woman. It's in good hands now. Raven next to him was literally glowing with happiness, clapping her hands. A few people in the room looked at them perplexed. Such behavior was unusual for an auction. It's time, Bart said, opening the door. I took a deep breath and left the room. We walked quickly down the hallway and stopped at the entrance to the main hall. Beverly, noticing us, got up from her seat and walked over to the auctioneer. They had a quick conversation. The auctioneer frowned, then nodded and took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unforeseen situation. The sale of lot number 17 has been temporarily suspended. May I have your attention, please? A surprised whisper ran through the room. Wesley and Raven froze, their smiles slowly fading. And now, said the auctioneer, I would like to invite the owner of the house, Mr. Octavian Cavendish, to the stage. I entered the hall and made my way toward the stage. People turned around whispering. Wesley turned white when he saw me, as if he'd seen a ghost. Raven clung to his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Stepping up to the stage, I accepted the microphone from the auctioneer's hands. Good morning, I said calmly. My name is Octavian Cavendish, and I am the rightful owner of the house that has just been put up for sale. I am here to declare that this sale is illegal and cannot proceed. The hall fell silent. All eyes were fixed on me. The documents on the basis of which this house was included in the auction are forgeries, I continued. The power of attorney for the right to dispose of the property, supposedly issued by me, never existed. The approval to change the category of the land plot is also a fake. I paused and looked directly at Wesley. He sat with his head down, unable to meet my gaze. This scam was organized by my son, Wesley Cavendish, and his wife, Raven Cavendish, without my knowledge or consent. They planned to sell my house using forged documents and embezzle the money. There was an indignant roar through the room. The Everett Construction representative rose abruptly from his seat and headed for the exit, pulling out his cell phone as he went. I have all the evidence of the forgery. I picked up my briefcase. Original documents on the house, expert examination of signatures, medical report on my full legal capacity. I'll make them available to all interested parties. Raven jumped up from her seat. It's not true, she shouted. Octavian, you signed those papers yourself. You just forgot about it. I shook my head. I didn't sign anything, and I didn't forget anything. Unlike you, I remember every document I've ever signed. Wesley, Raven tugged her husband's sleeve. Say something. But Wesley was silent, his face gray with shock. He knew the game was over. The auctioneer, clearly confused, addressed the room. In light of the new circumstances, the auction on lot number 17 is canceled. I apologize to all bidders. Beverly came up on stage and stood next to me. As Mr. Cavendish's attorney, she said into the microphone, I declare that all necessary legal action will be taken against those involved in this scam. All interested parties may obtain copies of the actual documents from me. People began to rise from their seats, chattering. Some approached Beverly for more information. I walked down from the stage and headed straight for Wesley and Raven. How could you? I asked quietly, stopping in front of them. How could you betray me like that? Wesley finally looked up. There was fear in them. mixed with something akin to shame. Yeah, I had no choice, he whispered. The debts. They would have killed me. You always had a choice, I replied. You could have come to me and asked for help. Be honest about your problems. You wouldn't have helped, Raven interjected. You never approved of us. You've always looked down on Wesley, on his decisions. Shut up, I cut her off. This is between me and my son. What happens now? Wesley asked, fear in his voice. Are you… sue us? I stared at him for a long time, at the man I'd once held in my arms, taught him to walk, read him bedtime stories, a man who had become a stranger to me. I haven't decided yet, I said at last. But I can say one thing for sure. You don't have a father anymore. You're not my son anymore. Wesley flinched as if struck by a blow. Raven opened her mouth to say something, but changed her mind. Now, I continued, I want you both out of this room and never come to my house again. Never again. Wesley rose slowly, pulling Raven with him. They moved toward the exit, escorted by the stares of those present. At the door, Wesley turned around, as if he wanted to say something, but I turned away. I had nothing more to say to him. Bart came up to me as they left. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yes. For the first time in a long time, I feel clarity. Beverly joined us, holding a folder of papers. All the formalities are settled, she said. The auction officially acknowledged the mistake and apologized. I warned them about a possible lawsuit, but I don't think it's their fault. They acted on the documents they were given. Thank you, Beverly, I shook her hand. You were great. What about Wesley and Raven, she asked. Are we filing a police report, I wondered. Part of me wanted to punish them to the full extent of the law, but the other part, the part that remembered Wesley as a child, was hesitant. Not yet, I said finally. First, I want to know how deep this goes. Who else was involved? Who they were paying bribes to. Then I'll decide. We left the convention center through the main entrance. The day was still clear but cold. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling oddly relieved. It was all over. I had kept my home, but the price of that victory was the ultimate loss of my son. Octavian? Bart put his hand on my shoulder. Do you want to come in for coffee? You look tired. I shook my head. No, thanks. I want to go home. To my house. On the way home, I called Evelyn, as promised. Everything went according to plan, I told her. The house is still mine. And Wesley and Raven? They're no longer a part of my life. Evelyn was silent for a moment, and then she said quietly, I'm sorry, Octavian. I really am. I knew what she meant. Not the con, not the betrayal, but the loss of a family. Even one as dysfunctional as mine. It's okay, I replied. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. When the cab pulled up to my house, I saw Wesley's Lexus parked nearby. They were waiting for me. I paid the driver and walked slowly to the house, preparing for one last conversation with my son. Wesley and Raven sat on the porch steps. She was crying, smearing mascara on her cheeks. He looked lost, like a child lost in the woods. Why are you here? I asked, stopping in front of them. I think I made myself clear. It's over between us. Wesley stood up, his hands trembling. Father, please, he said hoarsely, hear me out. I know I've made a terrible mistake. Yeah, a mistake? I interrupted. Forging documents, fraud, trying to sell someone else's property. That's not a mistake, Wesley. It's a crime. I know, he was almost shouting. I know it's unforgivable. But you don't understand the situation I'm in. These men, Cord and his gang. They threatened me, Raven. Said they'd break my legs if I didn't pay them back. And instead of coming to me, you decided to steal my house? Wesley lowered his head. I was afraid you'd say no. That you'd lecture me about how irresponsible I am, how I always screw things up. Is that how you see me? I asked quietly. As a man who would deny his own son help when his life is at stake? Raven got up and stood next to Wesley. You never approved of our marriage, she said, wiping away her tears. You always looked at me like I was some kind of… That's not true, I replied. I never interfered in your marriage. It was Wesley's choice, and I respected it. What I don't respect are lies and betrayal. I went up on the porch and got my keys. I don't have time for this conversation anymore, I said as I opened the door. I want you to leave. I want you to leave now. Otherwise, I'm calling the police. Dad, Wesley took a step toward me. What about the debt? They won't leave me alone. I turned around looking down at him. That's your problem, Wesley, not mine. You made your choice when you decided to sell my house behind my back. Now live with the consequences. I walked into the house and closed the door without looking back. Through the window, I watched them walk slowly to their car. Wesley was hunched over as if under the weight of an invisible weight. Raven was saying something to him, gesturing vigorously. I turned away from the window and walked into the living room. The house greeted me with silence, the kind of silence that only happens in places where you've lived most of your life. I sat down in my chair and looked at the picture of Harriet on the mantelpiece. This is it, I said quietly, as if she could hear me. Our son had made his choice, and I made mine. The next few days passed in a strange daze. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, read books, just the usual. But it was like something inside me was breaking. Wesley's betrayal had left a scar that I knew would never fully heal. Sometimes, sitting in my office in the evenings, I'd pull out old photo albums and look at pictures of Wesley as a child. A smiling, freckle-faced boy who looked so much like his mother. What had gone wrong? When did he turn into a man capable of betraying his own father? The fourth day after the auction, Evelyn came to me with pie and news. All the talk in town is about Sunday's scandal, she said, pouring tea in my kitchen. Martha from the bakery heard Raven telling her friend that you were suffering from dementia and didn't remember that you'd given them permission to sell the house. I grinned. No wonder. They'll cling to any version but the truth. And they're also saying that Wesley was fired from the real estate agency. After a scandal like that, no one wants to do business with him. I didn't say anything. Despite everything that had happened, the thought of my son out of a job didn't make me feel good. Had you thought about talking to him? Evelyn asked cautiously. Perhaps there is some explanation. What explanation could there be for betrayal? I answered sharply, but was relieved when I saw her concerned face. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I need time. She nodded understandingly and changed the subject. When she left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, watching the evening twilight fade over Maywood. The town had a life of its own, people coming home from work, lights on in the windows, children playing in the last minutes before dinner. Ordinary, normal life. Something I may never have again. The next morning, as I was about to leave for work, the doorbell rang. Bart stood on the doorstep with a folder of documents under his arm and a serious expression on his face. Do you have a minute? He asked. I have some new information. We went into the office. Bart spread some papers on the desk. As I thought, Wesley and Raven were not alone. They had an accomplice. The same lawyer, Hugh Price. He helped them forge the documents. I also found a connection to the city government. Who? I asked, already guessing. Lindsay Parker, Frank Dawson's deputy on the planning committee. She'd gotten $15,000 in cash from Wesley to turn a blind eye to the forged zoning documents. I shook my head. Lindsay was a young woman, newly appointed, ambitious, but, as it turned out, unscrupulous. What about Wesley's debts? I asked. Did you find out how serious it was? Bart pulled out another sheet. Very serious. In addition to the $300,000 to Cord, he owed 3 banks, 2 credit card companies, and some private lender in Boston, about $500,000 in all. I whistled. $500,000 is a lot of money for a man on a modest realtor's salary. How long has this been going on? According to the paperwork, he started getting into serious debt about 3 years ago. Small bets at first, then bigger and bigger. Classic gambling addiction story. Sports betting, casinos, online poker. He'd lose. Borrow to win back, lose again. I remembered that 3 years ago, Wesley had come to me asking me to lend him $20,000 for business development. I gave him the money, even though I doubted his business plan. Now I realized that there was no business. There were only debts. What are you going to do? Bart asked. Legally, you have every reason to sue. Forged documents, fraud, attempted illegal alienation of property, plus corruption in the city government. Those are serious charges. I've been thinking. Part of me wanted to punish Wesley to the fullest extent of the law, so he'd finally realize the consequences of his actions. But the other part, the part that remembered him as a child, was hesitant. I haven't decided yet, I said finally. But one thing I do know is that I'm going to change the will. Wesley won't get another dime of my inheritance. Bart nodded. That's a wise decision. I can recommend a good probate lawyer. I'd appreciate it. After Bart left, I called into work and took the day off. I couldn't concentrate on numbers and reports with only one question on my mind: what to do about my son. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Wesley stood on the doorstep, pale, unshaven, with red eyes, alone without Raven. "Father," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I stepped back silently, letting him inside. We walked into the living room, and I pointed him to the chair across from me. "Talk," I said, not offering him tea or coffee as I would have done before. He wasn't a guest now, but an uninvited visitor. Wesley sat down, nervously tugging at the sleeve of his once expensive but now wrinkled jacket. "I came to apologize," he began. What I did, it's unforgivable. I know." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "But you have to understand," he continued, and there was a pleading note in his voice. "I was desperate. These men, Cord and his gang, they're serious. They threatened not only me, but Raven as well. Said they'd do terrible things to her if I didn't pay them back. Is that why you decided to sell my house?" "I didn't know what else to do," he exclaimed. "I tried borrowing from banks, from friends, but no one would give me that kind of money. And time was running out. Cord gave me until the end of the month. After that, he paused. After that, he promised to send his men." I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where was the boy Harriet and I had taught honesty and responsibility? When did he turn into this frightened, ready for anything? "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Wesley grinned bitterly. "What would you have done? Give me 300,000? I don't think so. You always said that everyone should be responsible for their mistakes." "There's a difference between taking responsibility for mistakes and ending up with broken legs in a ditch," I said. "Yes, I wouldn't approve of your gambling. Yes, I would demand that you change, but I would have helped you out of that hole because you're my son." Tears came to his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Yeah, I wasn't thinking. Raven said it was the only way, that you'd still leave the house to me when you died, so we're just speed things up." Speeding things up? I could feel the rage boiling up inside of me. "Shiksorm, you weren't just speeding things up, you were committing a crime. You've forged documents, you've bribed, you've defrauded me in the city. I know," he was almost shouting. "I know what we did was terrible. But what was I supposed to do? Let them kill me or cripple Raven?" "You could have come to me," I said again. "We could have found a way out, a legal way out." Wesley shook his head. "You don't understand. You never understood me. Always thought I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't responsible enough." "That's not true," I interrupted. "I always believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. I gave you money for a business that I now realize never existed. I invited you and Raven to holidays, even though she always looked at me as a burden. I was patient, but there's a limit to everything." Wesley wiped his tears with his sleeve. "What happens now?" he asked. "Are you going to sue us?" I stared at him for a long time, trying to find my son's features in this broken man. "I haven't decided yet," I said at last. "But I can tell you one thing for sure. I'm changing the will. You will no longer receive a dime of my inheritance. Not the house, not the money, not the stock. Nothing." Wesley turned even paler. "What? But, how am I supposed to pay off my debts? Dad, they'll kill me. You'll have to find another way. Sell the house, the car, Raven's jewelry, take out a loan, get a new job, do what normal people do when they're in debt." "It's cruel," he whispered. "You know I can't raise that kind of money. You're condemning me to—" "No," I cut him off. "You doomed yourself when you decided that gambling was more important than your family, your integrity, your future. I'm not going to pay for your mistakes." Wesley jumped up from his chair. his face contorted with anger. You've always been like this, cold, calculating, incapable of empathy. Mom was the only thing that made you human. After she died, you turned into this. He swept his hand around the room as if everything around me was a part of me, a soulless machine that thinks only of order and rules. I rose slowly, feeling his every word hitting me like a hammer. Don't you dare talk about your mother, I said quietly but firmly. Don't you dare use her memory to justify your actions. She would be ashamed of you now, just as ashamed as I am. Wesley jerked back as if I'd hit him. You're going to regret this, he hissed. You can't just disinherit me. I'm your only son. I'll contest the will in court. You can try, I said calmly. But be warned, if you go that way, I will hand over to the police all the evidence of your fraud. All the forged documents, all the recordings of conversations, all the data on bribes. Are you sure you want to do that? He froze and I saw the panic reflected in his eyes. You're bluffing. You have no proof. I have everything, I said. Bart has been very thorough in gathering information. We know about Hugh Price, about Lindsay Parker, about the $15,000 you gave her in an envelope at Joe's 2 weeks ago. We know everything. Wesley slumped back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. This is the end, he muttered. I've lost my job. I'm about to lose my house. Cord's going to kill me. I looked at my son and felt a strange mixture of pity and anger. I could help him. I had money. But I knew if I did, he'd never change, never grow up, never realize that actions have consequences. You need help, Wesley, I said. But not with money. You need treatment for your gambling addiction. You need to learn to live within your means. You need to learn that you can't have it all at once, without work and effort. He looked up at me with eyes full of despair. I know, but right now, I need money. Otherwise, I'm dead. I won't give you a dime, I said firmly. But I can do something else. I can talk to Cord. Wesley looked at me in disbelief. Talk to Cord? You? Why? To negotiate a reprieve, to give you time to find the money legally. But on one condition, you start treatment for your gambling addiction immediately and find a new job. Any job. Wesley was silent for a long time, considering my offer. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, I'll take it. But, why do you want to help? After everything I've done? I sighed. Because no matter what, you're still my son, and I don't want you to die. But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you or that I'll ever trust you again. He nodded, realizing that was the most he could hope for. Thank you, he said quietly. Now go away, I said. I have a lot to do. When the door closed behind him, I went back to my office and called Bart. I need to see Vincent Cord, I said without preamble. As soon as possible. Bart was silent for a few seconds. Are you sure? He's a dangerous man. I'm sure. I want to settle this once and for all. All right then, I'll arrange a meeting, but let me come with you. Thank you, Bart. I appreciate your concern. After talking to Bart, I sat down at my desk and started writing. A new will in which Wesley received nothing. All of my property, except for a few personal items for old friends, was going into the administration of a trust I was going to set up. A trust that would use the money to benefit Maywood, the town that had become my home. In the evening, Raven called. I hesitated before picking up the phone, but decided it was best to wrap things up right away. Octavian, her voice sounded tense. Wesley said you're changing the will, that you're disinheriting him. Yes, I answered briefly. That's right. You can't do that, she exclaimed. He is your son, your flesh and blood. The flesh and blood who tried to steal my house. We were desperate. Tears sounded in her voice, but I didn't believe them. Raven had always been a good actress. We had no choice. These people were threatening us. You had a choice, I said calmly. You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help. Instead, you chose to betray me. You cold, heartless old man, she screamed. You never loved Wesley. You never understood him. You've always put your principles before his happiness. Principles are what make us human, Raven, I replied. Without them, we're just animals, acting on instinct. And if you think loving someone means indulging their weaknesses and paying for their mistakes, then you don't know what real love is. We'll sue, she threatened. We'll prove that you're incompetent, that you're out of your mind. You can try, I said. But be warned, if you go that way, I'll turn over all the evidence of your fraud to the police. All the forged documents, all the tapes of conversations, all the bribe data. Are you sure you want to do that? There was a long pause. You wouldn't dare, she said at last. You wouldn't send your own son to prison. Don't test me, Raven, I replied. I'm not the gentle man I used to be. You and Wesley took care of that. I hung up without waiting for her response. A minute later, the phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. I had nothing more to say to either Wesley or Raven. The next day, I met with the lawyer Bart had recommended and officially changed my will. Wesley was no longer my heir. Instead, all of my assets upon my death went into the administration of a trust that would use the funds for the benefit of Maywood. I left small amounts to Gilbert, Evelyn, and a few other old friends. To Bart, I left my collection of antique clocks. He had always admired them. When the formalities were over, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the weight I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I was no longer bound to the son who had betrayed me. I was free to do what I thought was right. In the evening, Bart called with news. I've arranged a meeting with Cord, he said. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at his office on the outskirts of town. He agreed to talk to you but warned me he wouldn't change the terms of the debt. I didn't expect that, I replied. I just want to make sure Wesley gets a reprieve. Time to find a way out. Are you sure you want to do that? After everything he's done, I wondered. I don't want my son to die, Bart. Even if he betrayed me. Even if I don't consider him my son anymore. I understand, Bart said quietly. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 2:30. After I talked to Bart, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at Harriet's picture. What would she say now? Would she approve of my actions? Or would she ask me to forgive Wesley, to give him another chance? I didn't know. Harriet had always been softer than me, more forgiving, but even she couldn't have turned a blind eye to such a betrayal. The next morning, as I was eating breakfast, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood a man in a business suit with a folder of documents in his hands. Mr. Octavian Cavendish? He asked in an official tone. Yes, that's me. My name is Jeffrey Lane. I'm a lawyer. This is for you. He handed me an envelope. A notice to file a lawsuit in court. I took the envelope, already guessing at its contents. Who's the suit from? Your son, Wesley Cavendish, and his wife, Raven Cavendish. They are contesting the modification of your will on the grounds of alleged incapacity. I chuckled. They're not wasting any time, are they? The lawyer looked confused. I'm just doing my job, sir. The details of the lawsuit are in the papers. Have a good day. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. Mr. Lane, I said, tell your clients they're making a huge mistake, and that they have 24 hours to withdraw the suit before I turn over all evidence of their fraud to the police. The lawyer froze, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Yeah, I'll pass on your message, he finally said, and left quickly. I closed the door and opened the envelope. As I'd expected, Wesley and Raven claimed that I was suffering from senile dementia, that I didn't remember giving them permission to sell the house, that I was acting irrationally because of my condition. They demanded a medical evaluation and that the changes to the will be invalidated. I shook my head. They were really leaving me no choice. This was no longer a family quarrel anymore, but a real war, and I was ready to fight to the end. After receiving notice of the lawsuit, I knew I needed a reliable lawyer who specialized in probate cases. Not that I had any doubts about the outcome. A medical examination would easily confirm my competency, but I wanted to be prepared. I called Gilbert, who recommended Alistair Brooks, one of Maywood's best lawyers. Brooks's office was located in an old red brick building in the center of town. The interior was a mix of classic and modern, wood paneling on the walls and state-of-the-art computer equipment on the desks. Alistair himself was a gaunt man in his 50s, with attentive eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Mr. Cavendish, he shook my hand firmly, it's a pleasure to meet you. Gilbert has told me a great deal about you. Only good things, I hope. I replied, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. Of course he has. He says you have a complicated situation with the inheritance and the contested will. I briefly recounted the whole story. Wesley and Raven's attempt to sell my house, the forged documents, the exposure at the auction, their threats of a lawsuit, and finally the formal lawsuit. Brooks listened intently, occasionally making notes in his notebook. Interesting case, he said when I finished. But frankly, your son doesn't stand a chance. A medical examination will easily confirm your legal capacity. But the evidence of fraud on their part looks pretty convincing. In fact, they're backing themselves into a corner. I don't want my son to go to jail, I said. No matter what, I just want to protect my property and use it as I see fit. Brooks nodded understandingly. We can use the evidence of fraud as leverage without prosecution. Force them to withdraw the suit under the threat of handing it over to the police. That's a viable option. Good, good. One more thing. I want to completely revise my will. Not just to eliminate Wesley, but to create something more, meaningful. What exactly do you have in mind? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the confidence growing inside. The idea had been brewing inside me for the last few days, and now I was ready to put it into action. I want to create a charitable foundation that will work for the benefit of Maywood. Part of the money will go to the restoration of historic buildings. There are many architectural monuments in our city that need restoration, but I want the bulk of the money to be used for educational purposes. Scholarships for gifted students from Maywood who can't afford to attend prestigious universities. Brooks leaned forward interestedly. It's a noble idea, Mr. Cavendish, and legally quite realizable. We can set up a trust to manage your assets after your death, according to the purposes you specify. That's exactly what I want. I want my legacy to do real good, not just go to a man who doesn't appreciate me or what I've built in my lifetime. I understand. We can start working on the documents right now. It will take some time to work out all the details. The structure of the trust, the principles for distributing the funds, the criteria for selecting scholarship recipients. How long will that take? About a week, if you're prepared to make quick decisions on key issues. In the meantime, let's focus on fending off your son's lawsuit. We spent another hour discussing defense strategy. Brooks suggested we countersue for defamation if Wesley and Raven started publicizing my alleged incapacity. He also recommended that I get an independent medical evaluation without waiting for a court order so that I could have an official opinion on my mental health. One last thing, Brooks said as he walked me to the door. Be careful how you interact with your son and his wife. Don't get into conflicts. Don't make statements that could be used against you. Remember that they will look for any opportunity to portray you as unstable. I'll be careful, I promised. Thank you for your help, Mr. Brooks. Alistair, please. I think we have a long partnership ahead of us. I left the office feeling that I was finally moving in the right direction. Creating a foundation to support young talent was giving my life a new meaning. It wouldn't just be a legacy. It would be a way to continue what I had always believed in, the power of knowledge, the importance of education, and supporting those who strive for more. On the way home, I stopped at a cafe in the main square for a coffee and to mull over the details of the future of the foundation. Martha's Cafe was a popular place in Maywood, a kind of center for town news and gossip. I sat down at a table by the window and ordered an espresso. While I was waiting for my order, I heard a conversation at a neighboring table. "Did you hear about old man Cavendish?" asked a middle-aged, full-bodied woman to her companion. "They say he's gone senile. He doesn't recognize his own son, forgets that he signed the papers." "No way," her interlocutor gasped. "And he was such a respected man." Raven Cavendish told my cousin that they wanted to take him in, to take care of him, but he became aggressive, shouted at them, kicked them out of the house. I squeezed the handle of the cup so hard my knuckles turned white. So Wesley and Raven had already started their campaign to smear my reputation. They're spreading rumors, painting me as an old man out of his mind and themselves as caring relatives trying to help. I finished my coffee and quickly left the cafe, not wanting to hear the rest of it. Martha Jameson, the owner of the city library, stopped me on the street. "Octavian, how nice to see you," she smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, Martha. Thank you," I replied, realizing what she was getting at. I'm just asking because, well, there are rumors. Raven said you have memory problems, orientation problems. Martha, I put my hand on her shoulder. You've known me for 40 years. Do you really think I'm suffering from senile dementia? She was embarrassed. Of course not. People say different things and I was worried. Then don't believe the rumors. I have a conflict with my son, and he's trying to portray me as incompetent to challenge my decision to disinherit him. That's the whole story. Martha rounded her eyes. Disinherit him? But why? I sighed. I didn't want to bring my family's problems into the public eye, but it seemed Wesley and Raven had left me no choice. He tried to sell my house without my knowledge by forging documents, got caught red-handed at a real estate auction. Now, instead of admitting guilt, he's spreading rumors about my mental health. Martha put her hand to her mouth. Oh my God! I didn't realize. I'm sorry, Octavian. I shouldn't have believed that gossip. It's all right. It's just that if you hear such things, know the truth. I continued on my way home, reflecting on how quickly rumors spread in a small town. By evening, probably half of Maywood would be discussing my senile senility and ungrateful son trying to take care of a sick father. At home, another unpleasant surprise awaited me. There was a message on the answering machine from Dr. Phelps, my therapist. Mr. Cavendish, this is Dr. Phelps. Your son called me today expressing concern about your mental state. He asked to schedule a consultation with a neurologist. I can't do that without your consent, but perhaps we should discuss the situation? Call me back, please. I shook my head. Wesley was active on all fronts, trying to gather evidence of my incapacity. I immediately called Dr. Phelps back and explained the situation. He had been my doctor for over 20 years and knew me well. I thought there was something wrong, he said. You've always been of sound mind. Don't worry, Mr. Cavendish. I won't give out any information without your consent, and if necessary, I can provide an official report on your mental health for the court. Thank you, doctor. That's very helpful. After talking to the doctor, I called Bart. They've started a campaign to smear my reputation, I said without preamble. They're spreading rumors about my mental health, calling my doctor. I know, Bart replied. I've heard the talk around town. Don't worry, Octavian. The people who really know you won't believe this nonsense. The problem is, not everyone knows me as well as you or Gilbert. To a lot of people, I'm just an elderly accountant living in an old house. And if you keep telling them I'm out of my mind, you need to fight back, Bart said after a pause. Go public. Show them you're all right. Maybe an interview with the local paper. Or organize a press conference about starting a charity. I thought about it. It was a good idea. A public appearance demonstrating my clarity of mind and noble intentions could effectively counteract the rumors. You know, that's a great idea. I'll contact the editor of the Maywood Times. Catherine Wheeler has always been an objective journalist. Good call. In the meantime, I'll keep an eye on Wesley and Raven. Need to know what they're planning next. The next day, I met with Catherine Wheeler at the Maywood Times newsroom. She was a young, energetic woman with a sharp mind and a reputation as an honest journalist. Mr. Cavendish, she shook my hand. Thank you for agreeing to this interview. There are a lot of rumors going around town about you and your son. That's why I'm here, Ms. Wheeler. I want to set the record straight. We sat down in a small conference room, and Catherine turned on the recorder. So, Mr. Cavendish, what happened at the estate auction 2 weeks ago? I described the events in detail. How Wesley and Raven tried to sell my house by forging a power of attorney. How I exposed them at the auction. I told them about Wesley's gambling debts, his desperate situation that pushed him into crime. And now they're trying to make me look incompetent, I finished. They're spreading rumors about my alleged senile dementia to challenge my decision to disinherit them. These are serious allegations, Mr. Cavendish, said Catherine. Do you have proof? More than enough. A forged power of attorney with signature examination, witness statements from the auction, recordings of conversations. My lawyer, Alistair Brooks, can provide you with all the necessary documents. Catherine made a note in her notebook. And what about your decision to change the will? What was the reason for it, apart from the conflict with your son? I straightened up in my chair. I've always believed that a fortune should serve an honorable purpose. Recent events have simply accelerated my decision. I'm setting up a charitable foundation that will work for the benefit of Maywood. A portion of the funds will be used to restore our town's historic buildings, but the bulk of the money will be used for educational purposes. Scholarships for gifted students from low-income families who want to pursue higher education but can't afford it. Catherine's eyes lit up. This is a wonderful initiative. How many students will be able to receive support? We're still working out the details with Mr. Brooks, but we're tentatively planning to fund up to 10 scholarships each year. Full tuition, living expenses, and study materials. That's a significant amount of money. Yes, but my savings and investments accumulated over 40 years of work make it possible. And the house will also become part of the legacy. After my death, it will be given to the city and turned into a museum or a cultural center, depending on the decision of the foundation's board of trustees. Catherine recorded my words, occasionally looking up with undisguised admiration. Mr. Cavendish, why did you decide to tell me about this now? Because the truth is more important than rumors. I want the people of Maywood to know that my decision to disinherit my son was not dictated by the whim of an old man out of his mind, but for serious reasons and a desire to benefit the community. The interview lasted for about another hour. Catherine asked questions about the details of the foundation, the criteria for selecting scholarship recipients, and my vision for Maywood's future. I answered sincerely and thoroughly, feeling my confidence in the rightness of my chosen path growing inside. The article will be in tomorrow's issue, said Catherine, turning off the recorder. And Mr. Cavendish, if you do not mind, I would like to make it the beginning of a series of publications about your foundation. To follow its development, to tell about its first scholarship recipients. I think it would be an inspiring story for our readers. I'd be delighted, Miss Wheeler. The more people who know about this educational opportunity, the better. As I walked out of the newsroom, my spirits were light. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Creating the foundation gave my life a new meaning, a new purpose. And if I had to endure my son's betrayal to do it, well, that was the price. That evening, Brooks called. Octavian, I have good news. I met with your son's attorney and presented him with evidence of fraud. I reminded him of the possible criminal consequences. He promised to talk to the clients and encourage them to withdraw the suit. That's encouraging, but I'm not sure Wesley will listen. He's stubborn and desperate. In any case, we're ready to fight. I've prepared all the necessary documents for the foundation. If you don't mind, we could meet tomorrow to discuss the details. Of course, I'll be at your place at 10 a.m. After my conversation with Brooks, I sat in a chair on the veranda, watching the evening Maywood. The lights in the windows of the neighboring houses, the occasional passers-by going about their business, the rustle of leaves in the garden. I love this town. It was where I'd lived most of my life, where I'd met Harriet, where Wesley had been born. Now Maywood would be the heir to everything I'd created. It felt right. In the morning, as I went downstairs for breakfast, the doorbell rang. Raven stood on the doorstep, pale and nervous. "We need to talk," she said without greeting. "You have to stop this." "Stop what?" I asked, not inviting her in. "This campaign, the newspaper interviews, the stories about charity. You're doing this to spite us." "I'm doing what I think is right, Raven, and I see no reason to discuss it with you." She stepped forward, almost right up to me. "You're destroying us. You're the reason Wesley lost his job. You're the reason our neighbors are avoiding us. And now you're giving away our money to strangers." "That money was never yours," I replied calmly. "And it won't be. Deal with it." Raven flashed her eyes. "You're going to regret this, old man. We're not done yet." "I think we are." I started to close the door. "And Raven, tell Wesley that if he doesn't drop the suit by the end of the week, I'll turn over all the evidence of your fraud to the police. Everything down to the last entry." She opened her mouth to say something, but I'd already closed the door. Through the window, I watched her stand on the porch, clenching her fists, and then abruptly turn around and walk away to the car parked at the curb. At 10 o'clock, I was in Brooks's office. We spent the afternoon discussing the details of the foundation, the governance structure, the principles for distributing the funds, the criteria for selecting fellows. I wanted to make sure that everything was well thought out so that the fund would work effectively even after my death. I suggest we call it the Harriet Cavendish Foundation, I said, in memory of my wife. She always supported young talent, even though she herself had no opportunity for higher education. Brooks nodded approvingly. A fine name and a noble goal. By evening, all the basic documents had been prepared. Some legal formalities remained to be settled, but the foundation was already taking shape. I felt a strange satisfaction, as if I had finally found a way to give meaning not only to my life, but also to what would remain after me. As I left Brooks's office, I bought a fresh issue of the Maywood Times. On the front page was my picture and the headline, Octavian Cavendish Creates Educational Foundation to Support Young Talent. Catherine Wheeler's article was written objectively and respectfully. She spoke at length about my plans for the foundation, about scholarships for students, about the restoration of historic buildings, and she only mentioned my conflict with my son in passing, without going into detail. I walked home, thinking about how strange life was turning out. Wesley's betrayal, which could have broken me, had instead provided the impetus for something new and important. Maybe there was a point to it. Maybe sometimes we need to lose something valuable to find something even more meaningful. Gilbert was waiting for me outside the house. He was sitting on a bench in the garden, leafing through a newspaper. "It's an impressive article," he said, coming up to meet me. "The whole town is talking about it." "What are they saying?" I asked, opening the door and inviting him in. "Mostly good. People admire your decision to set up the foundation, and few people believe the rumors about your senile dementia anymore, especially after such a detailed and clear interview." We went into the living room. I offered Gilbert a whiskey, and he accepted. "What about Wesley and Raven?" I asked, pouring the drink into glasses. "How are they reacting?" Gilbert sighed. "Not very well. Raven was at the Thompson store, screaming that you're a liar and a manipulator, that you were using the charity to get back at them." Few people took her words seriously. I shook my head. Raven had always been emotional and intemperate. Her antics only made their situation worse. And Wesley? He hadn't been seen in town for days. "Rumor has it he's gone to Boston, trying to find a new job." I nodded silently. Part of me hoped that Wesley would come to his senses, admit his mistakes. But the other part of me knew that too much had been said and done to go back. "You know," Gilbert said, sipping his whiskey, "I never thought it would come to this. I remember Wesley as a child, a lively, inquisitive boy. What happened to him?" "Life happened," I answered. "The choices we make every day, the weaknesses we allow to overwhelm us. Wesley was always looking for the easy way out. And in the end, he chose the easiest and most destructive: gambling." We sat with Gilbert for a long time, reminiscing about the past, discussing the future of the foundation. He agreed to join the board of trustees, taking control of the allocation of funds for the restoration of historic buildings. "This will be your real legacy, Octavian," he said as he said goodbye. "Not the house, not the money, but the opportunities you give to young people. That's worth more than any material wealth." I knew he was right, and for the first time in a long time, I felt real peace. It was like all the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. I had found my path, my purpose, and if that meant being betrayed by the person closest to me, well, I was willing to pay that price. The trial against Wesley took almost 4 months. 4 months of hearings, examinations, testimony. 4 months of mutual accusations, nerves, and sleepless nights. During that time, I had time to complete the paperwork for the Harriet Cavendish Foundation, select a board of trustees made up of respected Maywood residents, and even begin the initial selection of scholarship recipients for the next school year. The final court session was held in a small county courtroom. I sat next to Alistair Brooks, and across the aisle from us were Wesley and Raven and their attorney. My son looked gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. Raven, on the other hand, looked focused and determined, though she'd lost a lot of weight. They didn't look in my direction, as if I wasn't in the room. Judge Eleanor Price, an older woman with a shrewd eye, entered the room and everyone stood up. "Please be seated," she said, taking her seat. "Today we are ruling on Cavendish versus Cavendish." She put on her glasses and began to read out the judgment. I listened, feeling strangely calm. Whatever the court decided, I had already made my choice. My future and the future of my legacy had been determined. Having considered all the evidence presented, witnesses' testimonies and expert opinions, the court comes to the following conclusion. The judge's voice sounded smooth and official. The claims of Wesley and Raven Cavendish to recognize Octavian Cavendish as incapacitated and to cancel the changes in the will are recognized as unfounded and not subject to satisfaction. I exhaled. Raven squeezed Wesley's hand so hard that her knuckles turned white. Moreover, the judge continued, the court finds that Wesley Cavendish committed fraud by forging a power of attorney to administer Octavian Cavendish's estate and attempting to sell the property illegally. Wesley lowered his head. Raven whispered something silently, pressing her lips together. Considering the mitigating circumstances and Wesley Cavendish's lack of criminal record, the court sentences him to 2 years probation with 200 hours of mandatory community service. The court also orders Wesley Cavendish to pay $50,000 in moral damages to Octavian Cavendish. Brooks leaned toward me. It's a victory, he whispered, complete and unconditional. I nodded, feeling neither joy nor triumph, only relief that it was finally over. The judge finished reading the verdict and the meeting was adjourned. As we left the room, Wesley and Raven walked quickly past without looking in my direction. I noticed that my son's shoulders slumped and his gait became uncertain, as if he had aged 10 years at once. What now? Brooks asked as we walked out of the courthouse. Now I can focus on the foundation, I answered. No more litigation. And Wesley? Will you be seeking compensation? I shook my head. No, he doesn't have that kind of money anyway. Let the court order stand, but I won't insist on payment. Let it be a reminder to him. Brooks nodded understandingly. You are a generous man, Octavian. I don't think so. Just practical. There's no point in demanding the impossible. We said goodbye and I drove home, thinking about how strange life had turned out. I never imagined that my only son would become a stranger to me, that I would have to sue him, prove him guilty, that our paths would be parted forever. Evelyn was waiting for me at home with pie and news. They say Wesley and Raven are selling their house, she said, pouring tea. They're putting it on the market at below market value. Sounds like they need the money fast. No wonder, I replied. They have huge debts, and with today's court ruling, their situation has only gotten worse. Where will they go? I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. Evelyn looked at me carefully. Do you really think so? He is your son after all. I sipped my tea, collecting my thoughts. Sonum. You know, Evelyn, sometimes family ties aren't the most important thing. It's what people do to each other. Wesley betrayed me. He didn't just deceive me or let me down. He deliberately tried to hurt me for his own gain. I can't forgive that. I understand, she covered my hand with hers. I just don't want you to regret it later. I won't. I made my choice. He made his. Now we're going our separate ways. 2 weeks later, Wesley and Raven left Maywood. Their house had been sold to a young couple from a neighboring town for well below market value. Rumor had it they'd moved to the West Coast, where Raven had some relatives. None of them called me, never said goodbye. It was like I ceased to exist for them, and they ceased to exist for me. I immersed myself in working on the foundation. Together with the Board of Trustees, we developed criteria for selecting scholarship recipients, a system for distributing grants, and a program to restore Maywood's historic buildings. The work gave me a sense of meaning and purpose that I hadn't experienced, I hadn't felt in years. The first Fellowship Selection Board meeting was held at my home. I insisted that the process be as transparent and objective as possible. We reviewed applications from Maywood High School graduates who wanted to continue their education but were unable to afford it. We had 43 applications, said Martha Jameson, City Library Director and Council Member. And there are only 10 scholarships. How are we going to choose? On merit, I replied firmly. Academic achievement, community service, personal qualities, but special attention to potential. Sometimes there is a spark in a person, which is more important than all formal indicators. We worked late into the night, discussing each candidate, weighing the pros and cons. By morning, the list was ready. 10 young people who would have a chance to change their lives through education. This was just the first selection, I told the board. Next year, there will be 10 more scholarships. And that's every year. You are creating something great, Octavian, Gilbert said. Something that will outlive us all. I knew he was right. The foundation would continue to operate after my death, giving young talent the opportunity to realize their potential. It was a true legacy, more meaningful than any material possessions. In parallel with the educational program, we began work to preserve Maywood's historic heritage. The first project was the restoration of the Old Town Hall, a mid-19th century building in urgent need of repair. I personally supervised all the work, insisting on the use of authentic materials and techniques. "You're obsessed with that town hall," Evelyn joked when I once again canceled our tea because of a meeting with the restorers. "It's more important to you than your friends." "Not dearer," I smiled back. "She's just older and in worse shape." Life was slowly falling into a new direction. I found meaning in helping others, preserving the history of the city, creating opportunities for young people. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in my office, I thought about Wesley. I didn't regret the breakup. No, it was inevitable. But sometimes I wondered what went wrong. When did my son lose his way? Was it my miscalculation as well? I didn't find the answers. Or perhaps I didn't want to find them. The past was still the past, and I needed to move forward. Almost a year after Wesley and Raven left, I received a strange letter. No return address, postmarked San Diego. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a few lines written in familiar handwriting. "Father, I'm not apologizing or hoping for reconciliation. Just want you to know that I'm in treatment for gambling addiction. Got a job with a construction company. I'm starting from scratch. Raven left me. Maybe it's for the best. Don't look for me or answer me." Wesley, I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to figure out how I felt. There was no relief, nor was there joy. Just understanding. Wesley had finally realized the depth of his fall and was trying to get out. Okay, so be it. But our paths had parted forever, and I saw no way to put them back together again. I put the letter away in my desk drawer and never revisited it again. I had a new life, new goals, new meaning. A couple months after receiving the letter from Wesley, another unexpected event occurred. I was working in the garden, pruning roses, a hobby I'd been enjoying for the past few years, when I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened it, I saw a young woman with a boy of about 10. "Mr. Cavendish?" she asked uncertainly. "Octavian Cavendish?" "Yes, that's me," I answered, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. "My name is Olivia Cavendish Burroughs." "Yeah, I'm your daughter." I froze, not believing my ears. "I never had a daughter, just a son, Wesley." "I apologize, but there must be some mistake," I said carefully. "I don't have a daughter." The woman smiled a little sadly. "I knew you'd say that. Mom said you probably didn't know I existed. I was adopted right after I was born. My birth mother was Janet Burroughs. Do you remember her?" I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. Janet Burroughs. Of course I remembered her. We dated for a few months when I was in college. Then she suddenly disappeared, and I never saw her again. That was 2 years before I met Harriet. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "We have a lot to talk about." Olivia and the boy, my grandson, as it turned out, his name was Ethan, walked into the house. We sat down in the living room, and Olivia told her story. She grew up in foster care, but always knew she was adopted. When she was 18, she accessed the adoption papers and learned the names of her birth parents. Janet had died of cancer by then, but before she died, she left a letter telling her daughter about me. "I hesitated to look for you," Olivia said. "I was afraid of rejection, of being misunderstood. But then I read on the internet about your foundation, about scholarships for students, and I thought maybe you might want to know that you have a daughter and a grandson." Ethan, who had been sitting next to his mother, smiled shyly at me. "I have a history project," he said. "Mom says you know a lot about old buildings and historical stuff." I couldn't take my eyes off the boy. I saw something familiar in his features, the line of his chin, the shape of his eyes. He looked like pictures of little Wesley, and like me when I was a kid. "Yes," I said at last. "I do know a lot about history, especially Maywood history. Would you like me to show you some interesting places? Ethan nodded vigorously. Could we do it now? Olivia looked embarrassed. We don't want to bother you. You're not bothering me, I answered sincerely. Yeah, I'm glad you came. We spent the afternoon together. I showed Ethan the old Maywood buildings, told their history, and explained how our historic preservation fund worked. The boy listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, taking notes for his project. Olivia kept a bit of a low profile, letting us get to know each other. In the evening, when we returned to my house, I suggested they stay for dinner. At the table, the conversation flowed easily, without the tension I expected. Olivia told me about her life. She was a junior high school teacher, raising Ethan alone after divorcing her husband. He wasn't a bad man, she said, just not cut out for family life. Too much into freedom, adventure. He said family was his bond. I nodded understandingly, thinking about my own bad experience with Wesley. Some people just can't appreciate what they have. Do you live far from here, I asked. In Riverdale, Olivia answered. It's about an hour away. It's not that far. Would you come to visit? I was surprised by my own question. I mean, I'd love to see you. Both of you. Olivia smiled, and I saw something of Janet in her smile. The same soft features, the same sincerity. It would be my pleasure, if you really want to. I do, I answered, and it was true. As they drove away, Ethan suddenly asked, Can I call you Grandpa? I felt something clench in my chest. Not pain, no. More like a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Of course you can, I said. I'd be glad to. I stood in the garden, watching the car drive away, thinking about the strange twists and turns of fate. I had lost the son I had known all my life, but I had gained a daughter and a grandson I had never even known existed. Life never ceased to amaze me, even at the age of 68. Back in the house, I sat in the chair by the fireplace and looked at Harriet's picture. What would she say now? Would she be happy for Olivia and Ethan? For sure. Harriet had always dreamed of a large family, but complications after Wesley's birth had prevented us from having more children. I had no regrets about breaking up with Wesley. He made his choices, I made mine. Maybe someday he would truly change, find his way. But our paths were parted forever, and I accepted that. But now I have a chance to know the daughter I never knew, to become a grandfather to the boy who looked up to me with such interest and trust. To start a new chapter in my life when it seemed all the chapters had already been written. I went to the window and looked out at my garden, at the roses Harriet had planted back in the day, at the old oak tree we liked to sit under on summer evenings. The house that Wesley had tried to take from me now had a new meaning. It wasn't just a house, it was a place where my new family could gather, a place where I could pass on my knowledge, my history, my values to the next generation. The next day, I called Brooks. Alistair, I need to make some changes to the Foundation's documents, I said without preamble. Minus add 2 more people. Who? He asked curiously. Tom, my daughter Olivia Cavendish Burroughs, and her son, Ethan Burroughs, my grandson. There was a pause. Octavian, I didn't know you had a daughter. I only found out yesterday, I replied and told him Olivia's story briefly. It's unexpected, Brooks said, but I'm happy for you. Family is important. Yeah, I agreed. A real family's really important. After talking to Brooks, I went out into the garden. It was a clear, sunny day. Harriet's roses were blooming, filling the air with a delicate fragrance. I sat down on a bench under an old oak tree and closed my eyes, exposing my face to the sun. I felt a strange peacefulness. Life went on, despite the losses and betrayals. I lost a son, but gained a daughter and a grandson. I created a foundation that will help talented young people long after my death. I found new meaning in preserving the historic legacy of Maywood, the town that had become my home. It wasn't the ending I had once envisioned, but it may have been an even better ending. More honest, more meaningful, a finale where I could be sure that my legacy would serve good, not go to waste. I opened my eyes and looked at my house. The old Victorian mansion, which had outlived several generations already, was preparing to welcome new family members. Not by blood, but by spirit. And it was the right thing to do. It was what Harriet would do. It was what I had to do. No regrets, no looking back, only forward into the future I'd chosen for myself.